in the next few videos, I'm going to talk about the process of creating a page. We're going to start with this one, just focusing on the high level. How do you go about creating your first page? What are elements? What are blocks? How are things organized inside the editor? And then in the follow-up videos, we're going to focus on a few components, like the grid component, which is one of the more advanced components. And it's really important to understand how that one works. As well as after that, we'll talk about how do you speed up the whole process of creating a page by having reusable elements such as templates and blocks. All right, so let's start by creating our first page. In this screen here, the system first asks you to pick a template, and just move this one here. And because I have no templates created, we'll come to those later. I'll just use the default blank template to get started. Okay, so now we are inside the page builder editor. The editor has quite a lot of options, so I'm gonna try to cover the most important ones in this video. First of all, here you have a couple of important information. You will see what is the category of the page that this page belongs to. As I mentioned in my very first video, we have page categories that help you organize your content. And when you create templates, you will link templates to the categories. So when you create a page of a specific template, that page will belong to a different category. But if you use the blank page template, it's going to belong to the static category by default. The second thing is that we have a status indicator of this page. Now, whenever you are editing a page, the page will always be in a status draft, but then the page can go into different statuses like published, locked, or it can stay in a draft. And finally, we have the page title. Just press enter to change the title, and it also tells us what is the revision number of this particular page. I'm going to talk about revisions in a follow-up video. All right, so this is that part on the top here. Then we have a couple of other parts here, which are basically device breakpoints. By default, you're going to be placed into the desktop, but you can change the breakpoints just by clicking on them. This gives you a sense of how your page is going to look on different devices and different screen sizes. But that's just the start of that. There's a lot more into what this plays into, and it's got to do with properties of specific elements, which I'm going to touch base on down the line. But for now, this is where you change the preview for how your page is going to look on a different device. Then here we have a drop down with revisions. In certain cases, we might have multiple draft revisions, and then here we can just switch from draft revision 1 to draft revision 5 if you want to quickly move between revisions instead of going back to the list of pages and so on. Then we have the settings, and then we have a few more options here, like the page preview and set as homepage. The preview, what that does is it opens your website, and it opens this current page that you've built in the page builder and shows you how that's going to look like. The preview URL can only be accessed by like from this by clicking on this button. Like, it's not a live URL that somebody can just type in and try to guess your page. It's got some random strings to it to make it sure it's only accessible to people from the system using the system. And the other option is set as homepage. So when you're building multiple pages, you need to indicate to the system which page is your start page. So when somebody types in your domain name but doesn't give it a path, so www.example.com, what page should show up, right? That is the home page. So you can mark a single page from your page repository as a home page, and that page will load when somebody just types in your domain name. And finally, we have the publish button. Publish button will publish this page, and it's going to be live for everybody to be able to access it, right? Let's go into the settings just a bit. So we got 3 sections to the page settings. The first section is what we call general settings. Here you can define your page title. You can also set your path. So when somebody opens your website, example.com/demo page, they will see this page. Page snippet is just a kind of like a quick snippet or a summary describing what this page is about, more helping content editors to have a wider context about this page. Layout. So as part of the page builder branding, you have different layouts. Layouts are controlled through code, and you can have multiple layouts. They basically define this page content that you created inside the page builder, what is the surrounding content inside of which this is going to be rendered. For example, you might have a layout without your main navigation and your main footer that you use for, let's say, landing pages. And then you might have a layout that's used for your blog, which has a different navigation and a different footer. And then you might have your main layout, which is your layout that you use for your main content that has that standard navigation and standard footer. There's many different options to layouts, but again, they're controlled through code. Here you can select one. As you go into the page templates, a page template will have a predefined layout that's going to be automatically selected for you, so you don't need to worry about picking the correct layout if you don't have a full understanding of what options you have there. Tags are used to tag pages. It's a standard taxonomy. You can assign multiple tags, and that will allow you to find your content more easily, filter it, and do different searches across it with the help of tag. The page image is an image that you can set here, and it's kind of like if you want to associate an image with a page, right? If you set it here, it's going to be also used for your social media open graph preview. So it helps to have that image, because when somebody shares the URL of your website or a specific page, you have that preview image that shows up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and those type of social networks. So this is that image, right? If you set it here, it's going to be used in the system in a few places, but also it's going to be populated for your image, for your social media open graph. Now, these are some of those general settings. If you go into SEO, we have the SEO title and description. So the point is that you can use this title for internal navigation, and it's the same title that shows up in the list of the pages. For example, I can name this homepage, right? This tells me, makes it super easy for me to understand that this is my homepage, right? But I don't want my page title when somebody visits my website to be homepage. I want it to be the name of my company, the name of my product, and so on. So for those purposes, you can set a different title here. And that title is going to be used by the website, while this title is going to be used internally to find and easily search for certain pages. Besides the title and description, you can also add additional meta tags here. You can use these meta tags, for example, for Google Search Console validation. Many other tools kind of require you to add additional tags to specific pages. So here you can just give a meta tag name and a content to it, and you can have as many as you want, right? Besides the SEO tab, we have that social media tab that I mentioned. So this is to deal with what we call open graph settings. Open graph tags are used by social media websites to get a wider context about your website. And you can give it a different title and a description to the one in the SEO. As well as I mentioned, that social image share, you can have here an image set. So when somebody shares your URL on those social sites, the preview they get will be matching this image here. Because there's a whole plethora of different open graph tags, we added also the option here for you to define custom tags if needed. All right. So this is a quick overview of the settings that we have. And that's pretty much all of the options in the top bar. If you click here, we'll just go back to our list of pages. Now, on this side here, we've got a couple of options as well. So let me just move this one here. All right. So here we got the element panel. It opens up and it shows us different categories of our elements. Elements are the building blocks, the smallest building blocks that we use to build our page. The basic section has items like headings, text paragraphs, images, image galleries, buttons, and list of pages, right? The layout has the grid component, which again, we're going to cover in way more detail in a dedicated video. Then we have the ability to insert forms. We have a separate application called the Form Builder. Inside the Form Builder, you have the ability to build different forms, have triggers, integrate them with Zapier, Google Analytics, whatnot. But when you build a form, you can then drag and drop that form here inside your page builder pages. We have different embeds like SoundCloud, YouTube, general iframe, so you can embed content from third-party sites into your own pages, as well as social media embeds and some code embeds as well. There's a special category here also called saved. When you build a specific, let's say, element inside your page, and let's say you have a box, a card that has an image, a title, and a small summary text, and you have to reuse that card across multiple pages, but you don't want to rebuild that element every single time. So what you can do is build it once inside the page builder, and then you can save it. When that element gets saved, it shows up in this panel here. So if you need to reuse that element on any other page, you don't need to rebuild it. You would just go into the saved panel and drag and drop that element into the place where you need it. So this way you can kind of build a repository of small atomic building blocks. So you save time as you build your page. This is the navigator. Currently it's empty because we have nothing on our page. But as we add more content to our page, we will see here the structure of our page, the elements, the blocks in depth, and it helps us to easily spot where a certain element is on the page. I'll demonstrate this as we add more content. You'll see how to use it in practice. And then we have a few options down here. First of all, this is a status indicator if the changes that you made to your page are saved. You don't need to save anything. As you add and change stuff in the canvas here, which is that's the central bit, or in the element settings sidebar. So as you type and make changes and play around with your page, we automatically save, issue a save request. That is, it's an autosave function, so you never lose progress or changes made to your page. But this tells you if that saving action is working fine, and if there are any pending changes. For example, if you suddenly lose internet connectivity and you're making changes here, this is going to show that your changes are suddenly not being saved, and in that case you might want to check your network, right? And then we have the standard undo and redo capabilities. So if you make an accidental change, you can undo that by clicking undo, or as you see in the brackets, we have standard hotkeys for those actions. So Command Z for undo, as you probably use in the other applications. All right, now on the bottom here, there's one button, which is the button that you use to add blocks. Blocks are how your content is structured. So you have a page, which is the whole thing here, and that page consists of multiple blocks, and inside blocks you place content like the grid, headings, and paddings, right? And here we have an empty page, so there's not even a single block there. So to get started, we would need to click that button here or here to add our first block, so we can start adding content. Now, on the right-hand side, we have two tabs, Style and Element. Those two tabs will have certain options depending on the element we select, right? Currently, I have no elements, so this is empty. And now when we start adding elements to our page, you'll see the options we have here. All right, so as I mentioned, to start creating a page, we need to start with a block. So let's click plus here. All right, so here we have a list of blocks that are available in the system. By default, in an empty system, newly installed system, you will only have the empty block. The empty block essentially, as the name suggests, adds an empty block, but inside that block we automatically place the grid component for you, so it's easier to get started. In a dedicated video, we'll cover blocks, block categories, how block works, how they work, inheritance around them, and things like that. So I won't go too much into this interface here. I'll just add an empty block to get started. All right, so now we have an empty block here. And if we go back to our navigator, you can see now we have a block. And inside that block, we have a grid. And inside the grid, we have a cell, right? So you can see these elements as they get highlighted as I hover over them. But beyond that, sometimes this structure can be really deep, and like you might not know if you're like in a cell that's nested in another grid that's nested in another grid. It can also be quite hard to sometimes click on a specific cell, because if there's a lot of content on there, it might just not be enough room for you to kind of target that cell in an easier way. To help with that, so you can just click on a specific element in the navigator. That's one option. The other option is, so for example, when I'm inside a specific element and I want to select its parent. For example, now I'm inside, I have a cell selected. So when you select an element, you'll see its name right here. But I want to select the grid, and you can see here I need to really target it here, right? An easier way to do that is you'll see this bar appear at the bottom. This tells you where this currently selected element, which is highlighted in orange, is placed. It's placed inside a block, that is, it's placed inside a grid that's placed inside a block. So if I want to select its parent, I can just click here, right? So this makes it super easy for me to select a right element. All right, now for this very basic example of a page, we will add a heading and a paragraph, nothing more, right? So to do that, first we need to select a cell inside of which we want to add those two elements. And if I click on the plus button here, the elements panel will automatically appear. I don't necessarily need to click on the plus button, but I just need to have the cell active, and then I can just click here, right? The other thing is, like, if I click here instead of clicking on this button here, I need to drag the element into its place, right? So you can see now I got a heading inside a cell, inside a grid, inside a block. But the other way of adding an element, so for example, another thing to mention, to delete an element, you can go into the element tab and press the delete icon, or you can just press the delete hotkey on your keyboard. It's going to delete the element. But a handy way of also adding elements without needing to drag and drop is if I click this plus, the system automatically knows into which cell exactly I want to place a content. I can then just click to add instead of drag to add, and it's going to automatically be placed here. If I want to add another, let's say, element underneath the heading element, I'll open the panel, I'll drag it, and it's going to appear. You'll see the bold orange line. It has placed the element underneath it, right? So now I have two elements, and again, if you go to the navigator, you'll see we have a block, a grid, a cell, a heading, and a paragraph. The other thing to be aware of is that you can also drag and drop elements to change their position, but you can't drag and drop blocks. Blocks are not draggable. But in case you want to, let's say I want to add a block but above this block, to do that I would just go into the navigator, and you see that the block has this drag icon, unlike other elements. So I can then just drag and drop this, and you'll see the orange line tells me where it's going to be placed, right? So that's a solution for that. So let's delete this block. I don't need it for now. Now let's focus on the panel on the right hand side. If I select a specific element, like the heading, I'll have one set of options. If I select the cell, I'll have a different set of options. If I select the grid, again, a different set, and a block. So the options that appear here, they are determined by the element. For example, if I have an element like a button, I'll have properties like button and action, versus here I have text and so on, right? So the set of options are determined by the element I have selected, right? Certain elements are also interactive. For example, specifically like the heading and the text. What does that mean? So if I make that element active and I click again on it, I can now edit the text. There we go. I can also make the text larger, smaller, whatever I prefer, make it into a different color and so on, right? So, and it's same for the paragraph, right? So some components have that interactivity to them. But let's focus again back on the right hand panel. There's a couple of handy things to know. For example, if you have a very big page and like with, I don't know, 20, 30 blocks, you really want to kind of have a name on the block or a name on a specific element here so that it's easy to find it in the navigator. And to do that, what you can do is under the property option, which is an option that's available pretty much every single element, you can give it an ID. My main block. So now you can see that I have a name on it, and this makes it easy to find. And I can give this name to pretty much any element, right? It's going to appear here. The other option is you can give it a specific CSS class. This is more of an advanced option because you have to coordinate the changes to your CSS rule set to the options here. So I'm going to skip this one for now. I don't want to bother you with it, right? But an important aspect to also notice in this right panel is this icon. This tells you that the changes that you make to this element will be applied to this breakpoint, right? That means that I can make the text, for example, let's make the text orange on desktop, but let's make the text green on mobile. Well, not the best example here. Seems like it's resetting. Ah, there we go. So it's working. So this means that any change I make to this property, it applies only to that breakpoint, right? But if I make an overwrite to that property on a specific device, as the user opens that page on that breakpoint, they're going to get the settings defined for that element for that specific breakpoint. This makes it super easy to build a page on desktop and pretty much have 90% of your element settings defined there. And then if you see that something doesn't look well on mobile, needs more paddings, needs more margins, larger fonts, smaller fonts, and things like that, you just tweak those few bits on that specific device and off you go, right? Because this is the way that you approach mobile responsive design, right? All right, so that's that. And again, I encourage you to just explore some of these properties. There's a lot of them depending on the element we're talking about, specifically the grid, which we're going to cover in a dedicated video. But just play around with them to get a sense for them. I won't go through all of them here. That's about the style. Now the element panel, besides the clone, which will just copy the current element. So if I need to copy the current element, I can just clone it, right? And I can clone it multiple times. If I need to delete my element, again, I would just select it and delete it here. I also mentioned that you can save an element if I want to reuse. So for example, let's say I have this grid structure that I need to reuse on 5 different pages. So not in the current page per se, but on 5 different pages. And I don't want to waste time on rebuilding that. What I can do is just save that and name this demo grid and save it. All right, so let's now delete this. And let's say I'm in a new page and I need my grid, right? So what I can do is now on the element panel under the saved, I have my demo grid and I can just add it and there you go. I've got the same structure with the same properties already applied here, and now I can just make my changes as I need to. All right, so this was the very basic overview, and the point of this video was to just get a basic orientation into the page builder editor specifically, and in the follow-up videos I'm going to focus more on the whole experience of creating pages, because yes, this is a very basic page, but for example, if you open webiny.com, this whole page here is built with the page builder, right? So we're going to talk more about how do you build this rich experiences using the page builder and how do you structure everything, right? So I hope this video was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.